They were harder to drive than we had ever known them before. Men were being mown down in great numbers on both sides. We drove them across a fence, where they stopped and fought us for a while. Hi, my name is Bill Coughlin, and host of First Person Civil War podcast. While the generals of both sides get most of the recognition, the Civil War was fought by the men in the ranks, and they told their stories during and after the war. Follow me as I reveal what these men witnessed in the battles of the Civil War. To mark the 162nd anniversary, I have decided to make another special episode. Episode 49 is entitled Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York face Private Nichols and the 61st Georgia on 1 July and Captain Ray and the 6th North Carolina on 2 July at the Battle of Gettysburg. This episode relies on 3 sources from the men who fought at Gettysburg. First, a gallant captain of the Civil War, being the record of the extraordinary adventures of Frederick Otto Baron von Fritsch, published by Joseph Tyler Butts in 1902, who compiled and edited Captain Fritsch's diary. Next is a soldier's story of his regiment, 61st Georgia, and incidentally of the Lawton, Gordon, Evans Brigade, privately published by George Washington Nichols in 1898. And finally, a regimental history, 6th Regiment, in Histories of the Several Regiments and Battalions from North Carolina in the Great War, 1861 to 1865, Volume 1, written by Neill W. Ray and published in 1901. If you would like a map to reference the clash of these regiments at the Battle of Gettysburg, I recommend battlefields.org. They have detailed maps of Barlow's Knoll and Cemetery Hill, which include terrain features, regimental dispositions, and even troop movements by the time of day on 1 July. Frederick Otto Baron von Fritsch was born into a noble family on 28 September 1834 in Weimar, Germany. He entered the Dresden Military Academy at age 13 and went on to serve a little over 3 years as a lieutenant in the Royal Cavalry's 1st Regiment of the Royal Saxon Army. Baron von Fritsch then emigrated to the United States. While traveling south into Mexico, he joined the Mexican Army as a colonel to help repel the French invasion of 1861 and was captured on 14 September 1862. Baron von Fritsch was ordered to depart Mexico and eventually returned to New York, where on 1 November 1862 he enlisted as a first lieutenant in Company I, 68th New York, also known as the 2nd German Rifle Regiment, as the majority of the ranks were German immigrants. The 68th New York saw service during Jackson's Valley Campaign, Second Bull Run, and Chancellorsville. In late May 1863, Baron von Fritsch received a promotion to captain and took command of the 68th New York's Company A. George Washington Nichols was born in Statesboro, Georgia, on 22 January 1843, but little is known about his early life. On 10 May 1862, he enlisted in Company D, 61st Georgia, and was sent up to Virginia, where it fought in the Army of Northern Virginia from the Battle of Gaines' Mill through Chancellorsville. Neil William Ray was born on 4 August 1839 in Cumberland County, North Carolina. Prior to the war, Neill Ray attended the North Carolina Military Institute in Charlotte, but he soon departed after the firing on Fort Sumter. As regiments began to form, he enlisted as a second lieutenant in Company D, 6th North Carolina, on 16 May 1861. The 6th North Carolina saw service from the First Battle of Bull Run through the Battle of Chancellorsville, and Neill Ray promoted to the rank of captain and commanded Company D from January 1863 onward. Following the Confederate victory at the Battle of Chancellorsville, 30 April to 6 May 1863, General Robert E. Lee decided to invade the North with his Army of Northern Virginia for a second time, and began the long march toward Pennsylvania in early June 1863. The Army of the Potomac began its pursuit shortly thereafter, and marched parallel to the Confederates, ensuring the safety of Washington, D.C. while it marched north. In the leading corps on the march were both Private Nichols and Captain Ray. Private Nichols in the 61st Georgia marched in Brigadier General John B. Gordon's brigade, while Captain Ray in the 6th North Carolina marched in Hoke's brigade, commanded by Colonel Isaac E. Avery. Both brigades were in Major General Jubal A. Early's division of the 2nd Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell. As the Army of Northern Virginia continued its march, Private Nichols encountered the local populace. Our regiment was the first infantry to march into the town of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. I saw a little girl, probably about 8 years of age, standing on the stoop in front of her house, and heard her say, "Mama, are those men rebels?" "Yes, my daughter." "Why, Mama? They haven't got horns. They just look like our people." The Army of the Potomac, by late June, had only begun to enter into Pennsylvania, with the weight of its forces still on the march through Maryland, while Union cavalry operated around the small crossroad town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York were still in Maryland, and marched in the 1st Brigade, commanded by Colonel Leopold von Gilsa, of the 1st Division, commanded by Brigadier General Francis C. Barlow, and Major General Oliver O. Howard's 11th Corps, in the Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General George G. Meade, who had just taken command of the Army on 28 June. By 30 June, Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York camped at Emmitsburg, Maryland. Approximately 12 miles to the north, Brigadier General John Buford's cavalry division scouted around Gettysburg and identified the Army of Northern Virginia concentrated to the north and west of his position, and sent couriers to the 1st and 11th Corps, the closest infantry, to march to his aid. The next morning, lead elements of Major General Henry Heath's division advanced east toward Brigadier General Buford's cavalry, who had posted on the north and west side of the town. The Battle of Gettysburg had begun. As the opening shots rang out in Gettysburg, Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York began their final day of marching northward. On July 1st, at dawn, we were awakened and at once began preparations to march. But not until 8 that morning did our division follow closely the 1st Corps toward Gettysburg. About 11, we were ordered to proceed on the double quick, and we heard the roaring of cannons at a distance. As the 11th Corps approached Gettysburg, the 1st Corps was already in position on the western side of the town. But there were also reports that Lieutenant General Ewell's Corps was massing to the north of the town. The 1st Division of the 11th Corps was ordered north and established a line of battle along Rock Creek and an adjacent hill known as Blotcher's Knoll, and in doing so formed a salient in the Union line. Now situated on the right flank of the division, Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York prepared for the arrival of the Confederates. Our men were ordered to sit down, and we mounted officers gathered around General Barlow, the division commander, outside the woods. "Take a skirmish line out in front of us, Baron," he said to me, "and stretch the men to the right." I deployed a company, and by 2 o'clock, the Confederate skirmish line faced us. And firing began at once. I rode up and down, encouraging the men to keep cool and aim well, and soon we drove the Confederate skirmishers back. But now I noticed heavy columns approaching in front and from the right. We fired. And then I ordered the commanding officer of the skirmishers to fall slowly back into the woods and fire from tree to tree. Then I rode to the brigade in the woods and sang out, "Look sharp, boys! Don't fire too soon, nor too high. Wait until they get to the creek." This Confederate line was that of Brigadier General Gordon's brigade, and advancing upon Captain Fritsch was Private Nichols and the 61st Georgia. Our brigade and the rest of Early's division formed in line of battle and advanced. We met the enemy at Rock Creek. We attacked them immediately, but we had a hard time in moving them. We advanced with our accustomed yell, but they stood firm until we got near them. They then began to retreat in fine order, shooting at us as they retreated. Though Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York rejoined their brigade upon the Knoll, they were still facing a numerically superior Confederate brigade. The Confederates approached slowly and in magnificent order, and after the first volley of our men, they sent a strong volley in return. Our men, now standing, fired twice more. Then the Confederates charged through the creek, screaming savagely. As the 61st Georgia charged upon Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York, Private Nichols commended the fighting spirit of the men they faced. They were harder to drive than we had ever known them before. Men were being mown down in great numbers on both sides. We drove them across a fence, where they stopped and fought us for a while. The weight of Brigadier General Gordon's Georgia Brigade was too much for the Union 1st Brigade. Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York broke and retreated south, where they reformed behind Brigadier General Adelbert Ames's 2nd Brigade. Someone shouted, "Run for your lives, boys!" In fact, our small regiments were attacked by a force apparently 100 times larger, not alone in front, but also from the right side of our position. This was a Louisiana brigade. They came on running to surround us. Our men fell back through the light woods, just when brave General Ames, on foot, but in front of his brigade, marched into the woods. He found them full of screaming Southerners, and after a volley, his men, of course, had to run out also. Having successfully pushed Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York back, Private Nichols and the 61st Georgia met this fresh Union brigade and bested them as well. We advanced and drove them into and out of a deep road cut, onto the almshouse, where the Yankees stopped and made a desperate stand. Their officers were cheering like men and behaving like heroes and commanders of the First Water. The 11th Corps' position around the Knoll was at a critical point on the afternoon of 1 July. Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York were unable to rally their men before Brigadier General Ames's brigade began to break under the pressure of the Georgians' charge. Confederate numbers were too great all along the line, and finally, the order for the 11th and 1st Corps to retreat through Gettysburg was issued. Private Nichols continued with the 61st Georgia through the town and summarized the retreat. Here, the gallant Barlow, the enemy's commander, fell into our hands, severely wounded. He was treated kindly. We drove them on through Gettysburg and had them greatly confused. General Rhodes of Ewell's corps seemed to drive in the enemy about the same time, badly torn up. We pursued, and when the enemy got into Gettysburg, they became one confused mass. Their officers seemed to lose control of them, and we captured some 5,000 prisoners. This is unconfirmed. And we drove the enemy through and out of the town, and we occupied the town. Later in the afternoon, Captain Ray and the 6th North Carolina took the field to pursue the 11th Corps through Gettysburg, but they did not directly engage the 68th New York. Joining in the retreat and attempting to stay with his regiment as best he could was Captain Fritsch. I rode behind our men into the town and saw many captured by graycoats everywhere. He passed the regimental surgeon and instructed him to tend to the wounded before continuing. This delayed me, and some 20 Confederates came rushing on, hallooing to me to surrender. One excited fellow got hold of Caesar's bridle with his left hand and was ready to plunge his bayonet into me with his right, screaming, "Surrender! Get down, you damned Yank!" "You be damned," I answered, and cut off his hand with my Saxon sword. Then I started off, gave spurs to my horse, but to my horror found myself in a yard surrounded by high fence rails. They shot at me from behind and demanded surrender, and Caesar, with an enormous effort, jumped the fence and made off towards Cemetery Hill. South of the town of Gettysburg were a series of hills which included Cemetery Hill. It was here that Major General Winfield S. Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps, rallied the 1st and 11th Corps. With the Confederates in possession of Gettysburg and the Union Army fortifying the hills to the south, the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg was over. It is estimated that the Union Army suffered approximately 9,000 casualties, compared to the Confederacy's approximately 6,000. While Captain Fritsch was rallying the remnant of the 68th New York and other regiments in the cemetery, he was tasked by Brigadier General Adalbert Ames, now commander of the 1st Division, as a temporary member of his staff. When Colonel von Gilsa finally made it into the division's lines that evening, Captain Fritsch brought him to the stone wall where the brigade formed. "You can now command your brigade easily with the voice, my dear Colonel," I said. "This is all that's left," pointing to a few flags, each surrounded by a handful of sleeping, dusty men. Like many places on the battlefields of the Civil War, Blotcher's Knoll would be renamed after the battle. This knoll, where Captain Fritsch and the 1st Division of the 11th Corps fought upon, was renamed Barlow's Knoll, in honor of the division commander who was ultimately wounded and captured there. It would not be the last piece of geography renamed around the town of Gettysburg. Through the night of the 1st into the 2nd, most of the Corps of the Army of the Potomac arrived and took positions upon the hills south of Gettysburg. The 11th Corps remained on Cemetery Hill, with the depleted 1st Division holding a wall on the eastern face, while at the summit was not only the artillery of the 11th Corps, but also elements of the 1st Corps and the Artillery Reserve, approximately 15 batteries in total, with 6 facing east. The remainder of the Confederate Army also arrived in the vicinity of Gettysburg, with Lieutenant General Ewell's corps occupying most of the town and positions to the east, which were opposite the Union Corps that occupied Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. General Robert E. Lee's plan of attack for 2 July was for Ewell's corps to assault these 2 hills, after hearing the attack of Longstreet's corps upon the Union left flank further to the south. While this assault was intended for the afternoon, Lee did not send his orders until approximately 11 a.m., and Lieutenant General Longstreet's corps did not begin its attack until 4 p.m. This meant that Ewell's advance came even later in the day. While a general engagement did not coalesce until the evening, sharpshooters and artillery on both sides were active throughout the day, as witnessed by Captain Fritsch. One of the sharpshooters seemed to be especially after me, for whenever I rose, a bullet whistled close by me. I found General Howard in the cemetery, and soon 12 men with the finest rifles lay behind the wall near us, and bang went their bullets through the small openings of the church tower. After some 20 shots, we saw the fellows run out of the church, and one dropped down from a last well-directed shot of artillerie. Please pardon the pronunciation, but this is a French term that means rifleman, while another was carried away wounded. In preparation for the advance, the Confederates brought several batteries to bear upon Cemetery Hill, which sparked an artillery duel for a few hours. Captain Ray in the 6th North Carolina witnessed the barrage from relative safety. There was a terrific cannonade between the enemy's guns and ours, which were posted on the north and east of the town. This was not very destructive to our infantry line, because, being in the valley, the shots passed over us. From his vantage point upon Cemetery Hill, Captain Fritsch was able to see the effectiveness of the Union artillery. 12 batteries opened on us, every shot being directed at Cemetery Hill. Our batteries replied with great rapidity and accuracy, as I could see through my spyglass. Caissons exploded, and horses were thrown down in numbers. After several hours, Lieutenant General Ewell finally began his assault upon Cemetery Hill, with Captain Ray in the 6th North Carolina advancing directly upon the 68th New York. By late in the afternoon, after the artillery had about ceased firing, couriers and aides were seen riding rapidly from one commanding officer to another. We knew what that meant. The orders were given. Forward! Guide right! Hayes' brigade of Louisianians was on our right. Ours, the 6th Regiment, was next to Hayes. Never can that time be forgotten. Every man in line knew what was before him. We had seen the enemy gathering on Cemetery Hill. We had laid under the fire of his numerous guns. We knew the preparations he had made for us. Yet, promptly at the command, the line moved forward, and in a few minutes, we were in full view of the enemy's batteries and his lines of infantry. The fire was terrific, but our men moved forward very rapidly, bearing to the right, having the batteries of Cemetery Hill as their objective point. Though a temporary member of the division staff, Captain Fritsch was now in line with his brigade, ready to meet the Louisianians, and whether he knew it or not, the North Carolinians' charge. In splendid order, they came marching through the cornfield, and impetuously they charged Colonel von Gilsa's brigade, screaming, "We are the Louisiana Tigers!" Our men fired in good time, and their bullets told, but on came the enemy. More and more of them, climbing the wall and forcing the brigade up the hill behind the batteries. Captain Ray and the 6th North Carolina, after braving the fire of the New Yorkers to their front, continued their advance. As we approached the hill, the guns on Battery Hill, over towards Culp's Hill, had an enfilading fire on us. Still, our men rushed forward, crawled over the stone wall near the base of the hill, drove from behind it a strong line of infantry, and went still forward to the top of the hill, and silenced the numerous pieces of artillery that had been so advantageously posted. We had full possession of East Cemetery Hill, the key to General Meade's position, and we held it for several minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Detleo von Einsiedel, commander of the 41st New York, a regiment within Colonel von Gilsa's brigade, states that the brigade was arrayed from left to right: the 153rd Pennsylvania, the 68th New York, the 54th New York, and finally his own 41st New York. It was to his left where the breach in the line began, directly at the point of the 6th North Carolina's advance. An attack was made by the enemy at 6:30 p.m. This attack was repulsed without the assistance of the 33rd Massachusetts, which was a regiment sent to reinforce von Gilsa. On the left wing, the enemy came so far as to break through the line, which was kept either by the 68th New York or the 54th New York, and moved on to the batteries. Reforming at the top of the hill was Captain Fritsch and the 68th New York, among several other regiments. Now our batteries began to fire grape and canister, but some brave fellows came up to one of the batteries and demanded surrender. The batterymen, assisted by General Ames, 2 officers, and myself, cut them down. With handspikes and rammers, the cannoneers struck at their heads. And my good sword behaved well again. All who had reached the battery were killed. Then the guns were reloaded and rapidly fired, and we stood surrounded by dense smoke. Of the numerous batteries on the eastern face of Cemetery Hill, there was only one commander who reported Confederates reaching their guns and fighting hand to hand. Captain R. Bryce Ricketts, commander of Batteries F and G of the 1st Pennsylvania Light Artillery, who was posted behind Colonel von Gilsa's brigade. At about 8 p.m., a heavy column of the enemy charged on my battery and succeeded in capturing and spiking my left piece. The cannoneers fought them hand to hand, with handspikes, rammers, and pistols, and succeeded in checking them for a moment, when part of the 2nd Army Corps charged in and drove them back. During the charge, I expended every round of canister in the battery, and then fired case shot without the fuses. The enemy suffered severely. Captain Ray and the 6th North Carolina, unable to take the artillery, prepared to defend their newly won ground. It was after daylight had gone down. The smoke was very dense, and, although the moon was rising, we could not see what the enemy was doing. But we could hear him attempting to rally his men, and more than once he rallied up close to us. Our men had formed behind a rock wall, and as he approached, we fired a volley into him, which drove him back. This occurred at least twice. No one who has ever been in a similar position can understand how anxiously we looked for reinforcements. None came, however, and before long, orders came for us to fall back to our original position. The Confederate attack upon Cemetery Hill only saw success against the 1st Division of the 11th Corps. Not only was the 2nd Corps able to reinforce the 1st Division, but Captain Fritsch also identified other brigades now able to come to the 1st Division's aid. General Schurz had sent a brigade to reinforce us, this being from the 11th Corps. And hearing them advance, I joined and charged with them down the hill. They drove the Confederates back over the wall. And then we lay down, as our cannons were firing very close over our heads. When the last stopped firing, we saw the enemy flying over the fields, and noticed a brigade of the 1st Corps, which had nobly assisted us in the charge. The Confederate attacks on the flanks of the Union Army on 2 July were seen to some of the heaviest fighting of the war, with an estimated 20,000 killed, wounded, and missing. When added to the figures of 1 July, both Union and Confederate armies had sustained an estimated 35,000 casualties, which made the Battle of Gettysburg the bloodiest of the war by the end of 2 July. Still confident in his army, General Lee ordered a renewed attack on 3 July, which began upon the flanks and culminated in Pickett's charge toward the Union center. Captain Fritsch, Captain Ray, and Private Nichols, who saw only skirmishing on 2 July, did not participate in the fighting on 3 July. With such a high concentration of Union artillery still emplaced upon Cemetery Hill, Captain Fritsch did witness some of the devastation of the Confederate bombardment in preparation for Pickett's charge. After the failure of Pickett's charge, the Battle of Gettysburg was over, and the Army of Northern Virginia began to depart the battlefield on the afternoon of 4 July. In his History of the 6th North Carolina, published in 1901 within Histories of the Several Regiments and Battalions from North Carolina in the Great War, 1861 to 1865, Volume 1, Neill W. Ray was convinced that the Confederate Army was on the verge of victory on 2 July. By not supporting Hoke's Brigade of North Carolina and Hayes's Brigade of Louisiana in the storming and capturing of Cemetery Hill, the Battle of Gettysburg was lost. I do not know whose fault it was, but I feel assured in saying that it is not the fault of the storming column. It did its whole duty, and fell back only when orders came to do so. Much has been written about the Battle of Gettysburg, and what was accomplished by the different commands and the troops from the different states. But, at the risk of being charged with immodesty, I venture to claim that the storming and capturing of Cemetery Hill on the evening of the second day was not surpassed by anything that was done during the 3 days' fight. Captain Frederick Otto, Baron von Fritsch, though of German nobility, remained in the United States and became a citizen. He kept a diary during the Civil War, but did not attempt to publish it. After his death in 1900, his oldest son commissioned a book based on the diary entitled A Gallant Captain of the Civil War, being the record of the extraordinary adventures of Frederick Otto Baron von Fritsch, which published in 1902. Following the war, George Washington Nichols wrote a brief history of his experiences within the 61st Georgia in 1887 for several publications within the state, but it was incomplete. Surviving members of his company, as well as his family, encouraged him to write a more complete book, and in 1898 he published A Soldier's Story of His Regiment, 61st Georgia, and incidentally of the Lawton Gordon Evans Brigade. Thank you for listening to the 49th episode. Links to Captain Fritsch's, Private Nichols, and Captain Ray's books are now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the podcast financially. Link at the top left of the homepage. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find pictures of all three men. For this next battle, I have made several attempts at a special episode, but haven't found the appropriate number of sources until now. Making this episode will again take time, and as one other factor, I will also be on vacation in early July. Given this, I will release my next episode on 13 August to provide enough time for completion. On 13 August, to celebrate the 50th episode of the podcast, I have decided to mark the occasion with a special episode. Lieutenant Colonel Judson W. Bishop of the 2nd Minnesota on 19 September face Corporal Thomas C. Carter of the 27th Mississippi around Reed's Bridge Road. And on 20 September in the afternoon against Lieutenant Colonel James M. Ray of the 60th North Carolina, and in the evening against Captain Isaac H. Bailey and the 58th North Carolina on the Lafayette Road, and then Horseshoe Ridge at the Battle of Chickamauga. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.